Okay, so Jack, I'm in the Bay Area now, and I had to take the BART. I think it was from West Pleasanton to Berkeley, and I mean, well, the cost is one thing, but another thing is like, do you know why BART like they run so infrequently?
Well, I think unfortunately it's really just a result of the COVID pandemic, and to my knowledge, it may actually only be on certain lines because I believe the blue line to Dublin Pleasanton, and the yellow line are the line and the red line as well are the lines that run with 30-minute frequencies, which is really bad. That's definitely not a thing
Mm-hmm.
that existed pre-COVID. And I believe it was closer to 10, 15 minutes, maybe less than that in peak periods. So it's definitely changed because of COVID.
Really? So what was like the frequency like, before COVID?
Yeah, like I said, I think it ranged on depending on the line between 5 and 20 minutes. Because even in weekend off peak, it was still just 20 minutes. For the red line or the yellow line, so it was still quite good. Like I would consider 20 minutes good for off peak, especially pre-COVID. So now frequencies even in peak periods are pretty terrible for
Mm.
many of the lines actually.
I mean, yeah, it did take me quite a bit to travel the short distance, but I mean, hey, I guess it is a decent distance as well. So
Yeah, and to go from West Dublin Pleasanton to Berkeley, you'd have to transfer, right? So did that add any time?
yeah, I transferred at I think it was West Oakland from the blue line of the BART to the red line. I mean, I guess it wasn't too long, but it was not like other cities where you only have to wait like 3 or 4 minutes. I had to wait like I think 10 minutes. So
Yeah, and it could be worse. And I know that West Oakland is considered one of the more dangerous stations on the system. So, um,
the dangerous station.
yeah, there are a lot of people who are concerned about specific stations, especially because there's been violence at some of them recently in the past couple of years.
Oh, really?
Yeah, unfortunately, there was an 18-year-old who was stabbed on the platform at MacArthur Station. So I try to avoid that station if I can. Um, the system has had its issues in
Well,
the past.
well, dang. At MacArthur, like the one like right below Berkeley.
Yeah,
Holy crap!
and I believe that's actually
Wow.
MacArthur is considered the most dangerous station in the system, which is a bit unfortunate because it's pretty widely used for transferring between the red and yellow line.
Huh. Well, I mean, I guess. Wow. I guess I'll definitely keep that in mind. I'll try not to get stabbed on the BART.
Yeah, that's certainly. Fortunately, nothing's happened since then. I believe it was in 2018, but there's certainly a lot of people who have refused to use BART because of that.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, today I just took a short hop on the BART. What about you? Have you done any transit stuff since last time?
I haven't since last time. Um, yeah, nothing recently. Well, actually, yeah, I don't think the last time we, oh, yeah, on Saturday I went to San Francisco to do transit organizing. I think I mentioned this last time, but that was a huge hassle taking buses back because our Samtrans bus to get home from SFO was 40 minutes delayed, so I ended up having to go all the way back to San Bruno and then taking a different bus home. So that added about an hour, which was unfortunate.
Mm. But I mean, in terms of like the past few days, I guess did you do another exploring trip on the Bay Area Transit?
Unfortunately, I haven't. And I don't know if I'm gonna be able to for a while, just because I now my cross country season is gonna start soon, so that limits my time in the morning. But hopefully, I can do things in the afternoon at some point.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Do you still plan on going plane spotting by San Francisco Airport? Because you are pretty close by.
Yeah, and that's something I can do more easily, especially because I just figured out that I can take a Samtrans bus right to that park. So I can get there pretty easily, and I don't have to be there for that long either. So that's a lot more feasible.
Yeah. I mean, I'm in the Bay Area for 2 weeks. I arrived just yesterday, so it will be, hopefully we can do some transit related interesting things in the Bay Area. You know.
Yeah, and of course I'm not going to be here in the Bay Area next week. Do you have any plans to do any other transit excursions?
You know, I was thinking of that. Well, actually, first, where are you going next week?
Yeah, on Saturday I'm leaving to the East Coast, which I'm gonna spend a lot of time in New York, and then spending one night in Connecticut, one night in Rhode Island, a couple nights in Massachusetts, and then eventually spending a night in Pennsylvania. So it's kind of all over the place, but mostly the Northeast.
Wow. Is it just for college visits, or is there like, are you seeing family as well? Or?
Yeah, just pretty much for college visits. We're spending like kind of an extended period of time in Boston just to check out the city. I've actually been there before, but some of my family has not, so that's exciting. And my mom has a friend there, who I haven't seen in a while, so that'll be nice. But otherwise, mostly college is the priority. Although trains is too, because we're taking the train everywhere, and also gonna try to spend a day in Brunswick, Maine. Which coincides with a tour at Bowdoin College, but also we get to take the train for 6 hours that day, so that'll be exciting.
Oh, you're taking the Downeastern?
Yeah.
Like from Boston?
Yeah.
Oh, wow, that's really cool.
Yeah, and that will be my a new Amtrak route for me, because I will have been on the Northeast Regional in the Acela, but the Downeaster will be new.
Yes. I also look forward to when I can have a new Amtrak route, and it will be my first Amtrak route. But you're taking the train like all the way down to New York and Pennsylvania and all that?
Yeah, we're starting in New York, taking the train up to Boston with a stop in New Haven and Providence, and then eventually we're going to end up in Philadelphia after driving through upstate New York, and then taking the train up to New York with the stop in Princeton because my mom has a friend there, and then eventually ending back up at JFK Airport in the TWA Hotel, which is our last stop.
Oh, wow. It's very transit filled too. Huh?
Yeah, that was a big goal.
Well, I mean, I guess for me personally next week, since I will be in your city, I don't know. I guess I'm just gonna. I do want to take the Caltrain once, just because I wasn't able to the last time I was here. But other than that, I maybe I guess just take more BART, since last time I also was only able to take one trip. But yeah, I mean, any other recommendations in the Bay Area?
Well, I think if you're here and you're looking to take Amtrak, there's quite a lot of Amtrak trains that you can take, and actually it's kind of cheap for some of them. So that's something worth mentioning in a later discussion. But I think we have two intercity trains here for Amtrak. We have, in addition to the long distance routes, we have the San Joaquins and the Capital Corridor. And interestingly, the Capital Corridor is a lot more expensive than the San Joaquins. But you can essentially go from Oakland up to Bakersfield. But if you go, for example, I took it from Martinez to Richmond on Friday, and that was only $5.50 with the discount. So it's actually pretty cheap to go for 30 minutes on the Amtrak.
Okay, seems interesting. Maybe I can add my first Amtrak route here in the Bay Area. Huh?
Yeah, and then if you're not into that, there's also some cool bus lines as well that I haven't been on, but I know there's a new bus rapid transit line somewhere near the Oakland Coliseum, which I've heard good things about. But of course, that area is also not particularly well reviewed by people who come to the Bay Area, and people describe it as unsafe. I've been there and was fine, but of course, I don't know what it's like at night.
It's just it. Basically, it's public transit haven. In terms of the options, right? We have the trains, and we also have we have this. You got the subway, you got the trains, and you also got the buses.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm also curious because you've now ridden BART a lot more times. Have you had a chance to experience the Fleet of the Future, and do you think it's an improvement over the older 70s style train cars?
Well, when you say a lot more times, the times, what I mean is my number of BART rides has increased from 2 to 3. So I honestly, I'm not sure if the ones I took were the Fleet from the Future. I have a feeling they were still like the 70s ones, just because they were pretty old and dilapidated. So, I guess that's another thing to add to the itinerary, right? Experience the BART fleet of the future.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's hard to predict. But I believe if the sign at the platform says 3 door, you should be getting the newer train cars. But I don't think they're really they're used all over the place, so it's hard to know when you're getting them.
Oh yeah, that did make sense because like the ones that I saw, they were all like 2 doors. So in any case, we talked like San Francisco is has bountiful train and bus options, but we're actually going to be talking about neither of those today. Um, so I guess Jack, what are we talking about?
I believe we were going to discuss about airline alliances, which I'm pretty excited about because there's quite a lot to talk about.
Yes, indeed. I mean, I think well, the big question, as always, right? Almost everything aviation related. Um, which one is your favorite airline alliance?
I gotta go with the smallest one, the 14 member one, One World, and I think they get the win in my book just because they far exceed Star Alliance and SkyTeam in what they offer for frequent flyers, because I think really the goal of an alliance is to provide some continuity for passengers when you consider like what airlines they're flying. And of course, there are relationships between the Star Alliance airlines, but ultimately, I think One World does the best at grouping them together and allowing you to if you have say status with American, to benefit from that status if you're flying Qatar Airways or something like that, where you can use their lounges or exchange points easily. And I think that's where One World really exceeds, because if you have their highest status, you can really get a lot of benefits, lounge wise, and you can get free upgrades if you want to book the higher fares, especially if you want to get like a premium economy seat. I think that's where they win. Of course, they have far less airlines, but I know that, of course, Qatar Airways is one of the best airlines in the world. And I know American and British Airways really aren't that all hyped, but of course they fly to a lot of destinations, so it makes it really easy to get benefits. But of course,
Yeah, so I think I mean, I guess one thing to do beforehand is maybe to give an idea of what kind of airlines are in each of them, right? So I think one of the most defining features of the three big alliances, which are One World, SkyTeam, and Star Alliance, is that effectively each of the three main American legacy carriers of American, United, and Delta, each one is in a different alliance, right? And so One World. So what kind of airlines are in One World, right? We have American, we have British Airways, right? Japan Airlines, as you mentioned, Qatar Airways, and a couple other sprinklers, right? Like the Malaysian, like Royal Jordanian, Alaska Airlines also in there, which is pretty neat. So I mean, so that's One World, and then I think I will have to go with my favorite and what I believe to be absolutely the best airline alliance. It's 100% going to be Star Alliance, because Star Alliance was not only the first, but it's also the one with the most airlines, and it's also the one with the most. Actually, hold on. One of these statistics is it actually doesn't have the most destinations that belongs to SkyTeam, but it has the second most destinations, and it does have the most airlines. And that is what I believe to be the most important in an airline alliance. Like you said, right, connectivity. And it's not just, it's not just, for example, how fancy you can be with your passengers. It's also, how many connections can you have, and what airlines do you have to support that. And because of that, Star Alliance contains many of the largest airlines in the world, including the Lufthansa, United, which serves the most destinations in the world. It has Thai Airways, Air China, Air India, Canada, Air Canada, and a bunch of airlines across the world, effectively. So it's truly a very, very international and global. It is the closest that we have to a global airline alliance and connection system. So, plus they were the oldest, and they were the original. I guess you could say the OG airline alliance, if you will.
yeah, and I think that point about originality is interesting, because at least I think you're right today with the first, but I do. Interestingly, I believe that in terms of actually aligning airlines, Delta formed the earliest partnerships with KLM and Air France, and I wonder if that gives SkyTeam any additional bonus points for having like their, because I think when we think about alliances, we want to think about how aligned airlines are, and originally like this Delta KLM Air France alliance was first. So does that, you think, give any merit to SkyTeam being up there as a good alliance?
I think SkyTeam. I mean, it gets certainly credit. In my personal ranking is the best is Star Alliance, second is SkyTeam, and the third is One World. I think SkyTeam certainly holds its own. The partnership between Delta and Air France KLM, it is a unique partnership between them, right? And it isn't something that we often see with other airlines, for example. It doesn't even extend to other member airlines of SkyTeam, for example. Like you wouldn't see, even though, for example, Delta and KLM have this sort of connection. Delta certainly doesn't have anything resemble that to, for example, Czech Airlines or Garuda Indonesia. So I think I don't think that's representative of SkyTeam as a whole. And if we're talking about just pure connectivity out in terms of like just having a big solid partnership, I think it's definitely Star Alliance. What about One World? Do you think what you brought up the point about Delta and SkyTeam? Do you think that exists within the One World Airlines?
Yeah, I think so. American and British Airways, I think, give One World a lot of merit, especially in that you can essentially connect with them anywhere. And I think that's also a pretty old partnership, although it was basically copying United and Delta in their joint venture. So I really don't know if it provides any originality, but certainly connectivity wise, One World I think is strong. And notably, they have a presence, and similar to Star Alliance, in a lot of places around the world. With like Qantas, in Australia and Sri Lanka and S7, which is kind of is an interesting geographic location that really no other airline competes with, or alliance competes with. So I think One World certainly isn't lacking connectivity, especially with the American British Airways partnership.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I think what we're probably going to go into next is I think we should talk about like the actual airlines in itself and about this point of connectivity, right? So for example, you did mention how One World has connections across the world. I for this episode, I am going to argue that Star Alliance is unequivocally the best because in each and every aspect, Star Alliance surpasses them. So on this point of connectivity, right? For example, you mentioned Qantas, right? Well, Qantas certainly is a big player. For example, Star Alliance has Air New Zealand, which serves Oceania. But Star Alliance also has many of the large Asian alliances. Asian airlines, including ANA, All Nippon Airways in Japan, Thai Airways in Southeast Asia, as well as Singapore Airlines, which is a massive player on the global stage. So I think for these, I think that although there are some airlines in the other alliances, Star Alliance is still much better connected.
Yeah, and I don't really disagree, but I think that One World excels in different categories, and I do. And even still, on the connectivity standpoint, I think One World is very competitive and certainly better than SkyTeam, in my opinion, at least. Well, of course, One World's very much lacking in South America, but I think they make up for it with Qantas, especially because I do believe Qantas is generally going to be more connective in the Oceania region. And I think it's also important to consider that One World has Fiji Airways as it's not a full member, but they're like a partial member in a sense that adds some like a Pacific island into the alliance, which I think is important to consider as well. And then, of course, in the Middle East, you're essentially competing with Star Alliance, Turkish Airlines versus Qatar Airways. And in my book, Qatar Airways would win that just because you get. I mean, they're of course both very connective, but I think Qatar Airways wins on the luxury standpoint. So, I think it's an interesting
Right,
battle.
and I think to this point, right, especially about competition in the Middle East, yes, I would say that One World certainly has Qatar Airways, and Royal Jordanian, which are players, especially Qatar Airways. But as you mentioned, Star Alliance has Turkish Airways. But Star Alliance also has, for example, Egypt Air, which is also a pretty big player in the Middle East. And let's not forget that Turkish Airways, um, Turkish Airlines, um, is the airline that serves the most countries in the world. So oftentimes, for many of the, shall we say, less fortunate countries in Africa or in Asia, oftentimes, Airlines is the only, major international airline to serve them, which I think adds greater legitimacy to Star Alliance as, being, as I mentioned, the closest that we have to a global network. And I think another thing which is interesting to bring up is that, as you mentioned, Qatar Airways is part of One World. But the other big major Middle Eastern airlines, Emirates and Etihad, they're not. They're not part of any of them, which I think I don't know. I guess is pretty interesting. Just personally considering.
Yeah, and I know a lot of them. I think Emirates in particular had and still has a lot of partnerships with other airlines, and I believe that they had a lot of partnerships with One World Airlines, especially Alaska at one point, which they may have just recently discontinued, and I believe American as well. So on that point, I think there's still a lot of connectivity to One World, albeit not in an alliance. But the other thing I want to consider is that. Of course, Star Alliance might win in that most people are going to use it on a daily basis because it goes to the most places and connects to like the most cities. But I think, and even if that's not true, in general, I think we still have to consider like the purpose of alliances in the first place, and that's where I think One World really stands out because they, like I mentioned earlier, they give the most benefits to flyers. I think because Star Alliance. Sure, you might have joint ventures, but you really don't get a lot of benefits from flying on other airlines. Whereas, like I said, if you fly on One World and you get enough status with different airlines or one airline in general, you can use it across different airlines, which I think is well, of course, you can do that with the others. I think the benefits of like first class lounge access really stand out with One World, and that's where I think we have to consider other qualities too.
Right, but even in terms of like your benefits that you get, right? Star Alliance and SkyTeam, they all have, for example, lounge access. They all give, connectivity and points with the other airlines in their alliance. So, I mean, are you saying that, One World's, like, their lounges are better than Star Alliance and SkyTeam?
I think that, but more that One World Emerald gives you access to any first class lounge on any airline, with I think the exception of Qatar Airways and British Airways, which you can't do on either Star Alliance or on. Well, you can to some extent, but you don't get the first class lounge. You get the business class with Star Alliance, and I think that's where there's a slight advantage to One World that you like if you can have Star Alliance Gold status, but I believe that only gives you access to like Lufthansa's Center Lounge, which is just like kind of run of the mill, whereas you can use your One World Emerald status to get to the first class lounge with Cathay Pacific, which is amazing. I've heard.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know. Have you ever been on any of these lounges before?
I have not, unfortunately. So I don't really have a lot of personal experience, but I've heard that I've seen a lot of people on YouTube highlighting how amazing their One World Emerald status is.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think there's certainly merit to being able to have, I guess, better food or whatever other luxuries you want. But again, it's still a question of connectivity and as you mentioned, right? What is the purpose of an airline alliance? Because again, as you did concede before, right? The other alliances, they're certainly not as strong in the less developed world, shall we say, right? Which is where I think Star Alliance really stands out, right? So, for example, in Africa, right? Africa certainly isn't a small place, and the demand for aviation will only grow. What African airlines are in each of the alliances, right? One World, right? You have Royal Air Maroc, so Morocco. In SkyTeam, you have Kenya Airways, okay, right? But in Star Alliance, you have effectively all of the major airlines, right? You have South African Airways, which serves South Africa, Southern Africa. You have Egypt Air, as mentioned before, connecting the Middle East and North Africa, and you also have, for example, Ethiopian Airlines, right? And all of these airlines. Oh, not to mention the Turkish Airlines, which connects a lot of countries too. So all of these airlines together, they have a very extensive route network that connects a very large portion of Africa, of the aviation market that isn't London or Paris or Tokyo, right?
Hmm.
And I think that's definitely more important than, can we give our members, right, like 4.8 quality, 4.8 star food than 4.5 star food. And airline alliances are inherently about connecting places, eh? So I think that's where, again, Star Alliance is certainly much better than the other two.
Yeah, and I guess you're right in that regard. But to me, I feel like when you consider what makes an alliance good, just having a lot of airline partners in it, I don't think necessarily. Uh, like for example, you could have an alliance with every single airline in it, but just because it serves every single destination in the world doesn't necessarily make it good. I think it's the benefits that it gives you as a traveler that can elevate its status. Like I don't disagree that connectivity is helpful and like, but I guess in some regards it's like it's like saying a monopoly is good because it's connected. Like saying American Airlines is a great American airline just because it serves a lot of destinations in the U.S., which I don't think it would be an argument for why it's good. You know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I guess it makes sense. It really depends on what kind. Because I suppose if you were if you were a frequent traveler from, like, I don't know, London to New York, right? It definitely would depend on the benefits you get. Versus if you were one traveling to more, if your whole travel purpose were to go to less developed, not as commonly traveled to places, then I think that's certainly it certainly is another a different goal. But what I want to talk about is what I want to bring this conversation to now is what do you think about the future expansion of all of these airlines or of all of these alliances? Because we've seen in the past there have been airlines which are dropping out and then move to another one, right? Some even form new ones, like for example LAN Airlines, which used to be part of Oneworld, and they merged with TAM Airlines, which was part of Star Alliance, and the new LATAM Airlines is now part of Oneworld. So what I'm curious to know what you think is, do you think these airline alliances will continue to expand to, like, maybe smaller airline players, or do you think that maybe we will start to see more of a decline as more and more airlines are consolidated into greater organizations?
I think that's actually it's a really interesting question. And I think it's actually very airline dependent because from what I've seen, a lot of airlines have seemed to like realize that an alliance is not really as important to them. Like it doesn't really give them as much benefits as just a simple joint venture, and I think that's what we see with Latam, right? Because they were originally they were in OneWorld, like you said, but then recently in I think it was 2019 in the fall they dropped out of OneWorld and instead decided to form a joint venture with Delta, uh, and not join SkyTeam, and I think that kind of is emblematic that a lot of airlines don't really see value in alliances, especially Delta, and they may be just an outlier, but I think SkyTeam certainly is not expanding, and I don't think Delta really wants to expand it because they care more about their joint ventures. But we see with OneWorld they just added Royal Air Morocco and they just added Alaska. So I think OneWorld certainly has room to expand. They only have 14 airlines, and Star Alliance seems to just be losing airlines like Adria because of bankruptcy. So I really don't know where they stand, but.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, Star Alliance has been losing, like you mentioned, Adria, right? But also, other airlines, which, just frankly, but other airlines which, just frankly, aren't exactly the most amazing attributes, right? So, for example, Air India, which is also, on the verge, effectively, going in the direction of bankruptcy, right? It took them, I believe it was like a 2 year process just to join Star Alliance because they were really seen as a liability, and one which would bring down the reputation of the airline alliance as a whole. So I guess in that regard, it's definitely, alliances. Uh, I feel like, a lot of airlines are realizing that they're sort of being forced to play, uh, in a sense, patchwork, right, to help sustain other airlines. And that may be, I believe that was also one of the reasons why, for example, Emirates actually considered joining Star Alliance, but they instead opted out. I think that's definitely a reason which, the airlines are becoming more and more aware of. But I do think at the same time, for example, right, like Fiji Airways, they're effectively their only path forward is to gain greater status within One World, right?
Hmm.
So I feel like, well, I definitely agree. It's more airline dependent, but I guess for the time being, each one of each one of the alliances, they definitely all of them have major power player airlines, and for now it's really dependent on what how those how would you say this? It's really dependent on how these airlines are able to connect best.
Yeah, it feels like it's really hard to predict within individual alliances, and like I said, like I think it is very dependent on like what the airlines within the alliance want. And I think the one thing that's clear to me is that Star Alliance is not really going to expand. And like I said, with Air India, they're kind of a liability. And I also see Asiana too, which may be bought by Korean Air, and I wonder what that would end up, whether they would stay in Star Alliance or I guess move to Star Alliance because Korean Air would still stand, or if Korean Air would just stay in SkyTeam. So that I think is interesting to follow as well. And I think South African too, because that would be a huge loss for Star Alliance if they were to go bankrupt, which I've heard rumors that they might in recent months, because that would take out a lot of the African connections within, or at least in Southern Africa for Star Alliance. And I guess if we're looking at connectivity, that'd be a huge blow.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Plus, not to mention, right, especially with like you mentioned, South Africa. COVID has hit not only each of the individual airlines super hard, but also the alliances in general, because the last thing that people want is to connect from, people already don't exactly want to travel from point to point on one airline. The last thing they would want to do is to connect between airlines, right, via an alliance to further increase the possibility of um, sickness or whatever. So I guess that's really another thing to look out for, eh? And I'm not sure if what you think about this, but do you think that at least for COVID, do you think that the airline alliances will greatly suffer, or do you think that maybe in the future they would still be able to hold in case of a COVID like disaster?
Yeah, I think. Well, clearly, right now we're at least in the U.S. we're definitely closer to the end than the beginning of COVID, and I think alliances are doing fairly well right now, at least. And if anything, I think they offer more flexibility to travelers because they can serve routes that some airlines cut. Uh, and I think people, I would highly doubt that there's actually a lot of skepticism about connecting airlines, but that's just me at least. Um, so certainly, I think the pandemic didn't really cause any long-standing damages to these lines, at least, um, except for some alliances or airlines going bankrupt, of course. But I think overall, if anything, connectivity is probably going to be helpful for people looking to travel, rather than just being forced to stay on one airline.
Uh-huh, yeah. Yeah, for sure. Sorry for the background noise right now. It's there's I guess there were some people outside in Berkeley where I am right now. But I mean, to your point on definitely to maintain the connections even in the event of a disaster. I guess really like you mentioned, we're definitely closer to the end than the beginning of COVID now. So I feel like, at least what I believe is that in the future, right, once air travel is back to normal, these airlines, they effectively, like you mentioned, One World certainly has room to grow, but maybe the others, have, are able to, aren't exactly able to continue to grow, right? More and more airlines will start to see them as liabilities, as I mentioned. But one other thing that I wanted to ask is, I guess, really, is what do you think about like the current interplay between these different alliances? Like, do you think there's any competition at all? Do you think there's the alliances are really important in terms of marketing for any of the airlines? Or do you think this is mainly just that, oh, hey, by the way, if you fly us, you get the benefits with these other airlines as well?
Yeah, I think it's more of the latter to me at least. I mean, I don't really see a lot of competition to try to make one alliance better than the other, and I think at this point it's incredibly subjective as to which is somebody's favorite, and it's probably more location dependent, which I really don't think the alliances can compete because, of course, like I don't think Delta's going to try to make a huge push to start serving people near Doha to compete with Qatar Airways, and I guess that kind of just makes it more seeming obvious that alliances really aren't a huge deal for these airlines, but they do want to just point out that there's options when traveling, and I think there's still always going to be like the announcements like welcome or thank you for flying Delta, a SkyTeam member or something like that. Like they still are, I think, proud of their identity, but I don't think there really is much competing. But I'm curious what you think on this.
Well, I think there's definitely there are definitely tangible differences and tangible effects of this sort of competition. Because, for example, if like Beijing in China has a new airport, right? The new Beijing airport, the Daxing airport. It's actually, even though it's a much bigger airport than the current capital one, all Star Alliance member airlines are not going to move to the new airport because the current Beijing Capital International Airport is already an Air China hub, and because Air China is part of Star Alliance, that would mean that all of the connecting airline, all of the other Star Alliance members, right, like Lufthansa or United, they're all going to remain at Capital, whereas all the other airlines are going to move to this other airport on the far other side of the city. So I think as we can see from this case, it definitely the airlines are consolidating towards a greater organization amongst their own alliances. So for example, if you fly American to Beijing International Airport or to the new airport, right? And then from there you want to connect onto a domestic flight within China itself. It's definitely going to be harder just because Air China is not Air China does not serve the new international airport, the new airport. Whereas if you flew another Star Alliance member into Beijing, then you can definitely connect. You can definitely connect onto an Air China flight anywhere on their network effectively. So I think this is definitely a case in which this is certainly a very tangible case in which the airlines, they are moving towards making the alliance a bigger deal. But I'm not too sure if this is much the case anywhere. I honestly can't think of another place in which this sort of action is taking place. Although I definitely think that there may be there definitely will be possibility for this in the future, especially since more and more countries are considering, more and more cities are considering building new airports, including, for example, Cairo in Egypt or Jakarta in Indonesia. So I mean, I don't know. Do you think maybe this sort of consolidation will become more prevalent?
Yeah, I think it will, but I think it already is prevalent as you mentioned, because I think we see like with Beijing, but also even just at individual airports, we see terminals consolidating. I think because even at SFO here, nearly with very few exceptions, all of the international Starlines airlines use one international terminal, and nearly all the other airlines with some exceptions, like Asiana and Avianca. They all use the other international terminal. But I think also when I was in at Narita Airport in Tokyo, every single Star Alliance airline uses Terminal 1 or specific gates in Terminal 1, and then every other airline, One World and SkyTeam, One World, I believe, exclusively uses Terminal 2, and then the SkyTeam airlines that aren't related to either JAL or ANA use some Terminal 1 gates. So I think we see that already with terminal consolidation and Star Alliance terminals just coming out into fruition. And I guess it's more just a necessity at this point, because with more and more people booking connecting tickets, it's going to be really difficult to force people to connect to different parts of the airport.
And even if even amongst what we would consider more mundane flights, I think it's definitely posing more of a hassle for many travelers who travel between these different aligned airlines. So for example, even let's say if you want to fly between if you want to fly an American airline into Canada and then connect onto Air Canada, right? If you were to fly Delta or American, that would require effectively another change of terminal within Canada itself, because Air Canada is a Star Alliance member. So it's definitely posing more of a hassle in terms of the consolidation, and a greater push towards flying within within the bounds of an alliance. But I mean, I guess that leads to the question, and I'm curious what you think is, do you think travelers as this sort of greater push towards travel within one alliance, do you think many travelers will be affected, or will take that into account? At least the tangible effects of it.
If anything, I think it's beneficial, at least from a standpoint of someone who's looking at Google Flights a lot. There's more consolidation. I think ultimately just means more possibilities for connections, and ultimately that's just going to lead to cheaper flight prices. So I guess with more consolidation, it just means it's easier to book connecting routes and not separate tickets, which is never going to harm customers. So I don't really see any I don't have any qualms with it moving forward. Certainly.
I guess that makes sense. As they're able to offer lower prices if they travel within their own alliance. I guess that certainly is a great benefit.
Yeah, and having to not take your bags and then go through security again to fly a different airline, that is very helpful.
So another thing I'm curious about these airline alliances, which is pretty evident once you look at the list of members, is that there's effectively no low cost carriers within any of these alliances. Well, first I want to ask you, do you know why that is? And second, do you think there ever will be a case in which low cost carriers would, in a sense, have any reason at all to even consider these alliances?
Yeah, I don't actually know the exact reason, and if you do, if you have knowledge on this, I'd love to hear it. But I don't, from an incentive standpoint, see really any reason for them to join, especially when a lot of them, especially Ryanair, don't really fly to the major airports as much, so they really don't have a lot of connection opportunities, which would kind of make an alliance. That's really when you want to be aligned. But I mean, Southwest at this point could very well join an alliance and have some connections, but they still too don't really fly to a lot of major airports as much as airlines like Alaska do at this point. So I really don't see the incentive standpoint on their end. And they have also, Southwest has tended to maverick a lot and to at least remove themselves from external search engines for flights, and you have to book on their own website, which I think has limited them. And maybe with their new business changes recently and their decision to start opening up their tickets to more sites, that maybe we'll see them join Alliance, but I really don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's exactly what you mentioned, right? Like how Southwest even remove themselves from third party vendors. I think it's part of it is certainly well, actually I shouldn't say part of it. The entire goal of low cost carriers is to save on money, right? And I think certainly certainly for many of the low cost carriers. Although having this sort of alliance would be beneficial in terms of connections and whatnot, it would pose certainly a ton of logistics concerns. For example, even the mundane things like having a more complex ticketing system to offer connections, which I'm pretty sure even airlines like Ryanair or EasyJet, they don't even like they only sell them. They only sell tickets individually. There's no like effective connecting option. You would just have to buy another ticket individually. So I think that's definitely one main reason. Although I would certainly say that like if they did have these sorts of connections, even amongst low cost carriers themselves, I think it would be greatly beneficial for them. But I guess for now, you know, these airline alliances are all still in the league of the luxury airlines, eh?
Yeah, certainly. Although one thing we haven't brought up, which I think is important, is that there are more than just these three alliances, and I think one alliance that's it's fascinating is the Vanilla Alliance, which only has five airlines, but they're all very similar geographically, and I wonder because they're also not incredibly luxury either. Whether what was the decision making process behind them forming their own alliance rather than joining one of the other big alliances, especially like with Air Austral could have easily joined like SkyTeam and had agreements with Air France, which I think would be huge.
Well, I think for Vanilla Alliance itself, and I think maybe a bit of context here. It's effectively only five airlines, which are Air Austral, Air Madagascar, Air Mauritius, Air Seychelles, and Inter-Île, which basically translates to Inter Islands Air, and this is named Vanilla. This is the aptly named Vanilla Alliance after the islands in the South Indian Ocean where vanilla is produced. And what I think about this is that I think you're absolutely correct in that Air Austral especially could have certainly joined in one of the bigger airline alliances, but I think for this one specifically, their goal is certainly not to become that world connecting, the world connecting network of airlines, right? I think this is Vanilla Air Alliance and many of the other smaller ones. They're more focused on just connecting people locally, between, for example, Madagascar, Mauritius, and the Seychelles, which are all in the same relative global geographic location. I honestly don't see how it would be appealing to any other airlines, especially ones that barely serve the southern Indian Ocean. And I certainly don't think that these airlines they don't strive for global dominance or to become maybe even a world player. I think they're just maybe mainly trying to push for more interconnectivity between the islands themselves.
Yeah, and that's interesting, at least because on the Wikipedia page about them, it notes that they signed what they call a pact, which makes it seem like it's more just they want to work together rather than compete in the region. Because I imagine it's difficult if they're all competing for similar air traffic. So I guess from a business standpoint, it's much better to cooperate in that region rather than try to compete.
Right, and you can even read online, right? It says in August 2010, Seychelles, Mauritius, Madagascar, the Comoros, Réunion, and Mayotte united under the brand the Vanilla Airlines, right? Or I'm sorry, the Vanilla Islands, to promote tourism in the region. And it was each of those countries, each of those territories represent respective airlines that are part of this alliance. So it's definitely not. Like I said before, this is definitely not one which is striving for more connections per se, but it is one to improve connectivity and to bolster the standing of the region as a whole, to have one coherent message to the rest of the world saying, hey, this is who we are, come and visit, rather than each and every single one competing with each other, which I certainly think is an interesting model. I don't know. Do you think another question which is raised by this is, do you think maybe we'll see more alliances like this spring up around the world?
Yeah, and I think it's possible, and I guess that also brings me to discussing the value alliance too, which is very similar to that, where there's five airlines in a fairly similar region competing, and notably all five of these are low cost airlines in in Eastern Asia generally, which it's interesting because I think when you it's similar to the vanilla lines at least because where you have airlines that are pretty similar in their branding and what they offer, but if you can group together, I think it can bring economic benefits to all five, which would I think be good for all of their profit and not really detrimental at all.
I mean, with the value alliance specifically, right? This is again, this is actually an interesting one because it is between more, low cost carriers, between Cebu Pacific, Sebgo, which are both based in the Philippines, Jeju Air in South Korea, Nok Air in Thailand, and Scoot, which is based in Singapore. And I think this one is certainly. I think this airline, the Value Alliance, is not exactly. I think this is different from both the other ones, which is I don't think it's necessary to promote tourism in the region per se, because there's certainly not a shortage of
Yeah.
people wanting to visit the Philippines, South Korea, Thailand or Singapore. But I do think what this mentioned before and the lack, and also based on the lack of low cost representation in the big airlines, is that there certainly are benefits to having connections between and having benefits between multiple low cost carriers, especially since low cost carriers are their primary target audience is tourists, and for tourists having more of these sort of options, having more easier easier times with connecting, I think that's certainly beneficial. Although I don't know, what do you make of these smaller alliances of Value Alliance and the Vanilla Alliance?
Well, I think especially with the Value Alliance, you create a lot of opportunities for all five of the airlines to take away significant passenger traffic on some of the bigger, more luxury airlines. Because at least, like you could fly from South Korea to Australia on, say Jeju Air, which I don't actually know if they fly to Singapore or not. But if you were able to connect between say Scoot and Jeju Air or Cebu Pacific, you create a lot of cheap flight connections that you otherwise wouldn't have, which I think would be really game changing, especially given that these flights cover. Scoot, for example, operates a lot of long haul flights. At a low cost, which I think when you put the long haul aspect into it, it could be really game changing. Even though it only has five airlines, and I guess it parallels the Vanilla lines too, because they also, especially Air Austria, also operates a few long haul flights as well. And if you can create a dynamic merger between some of these shorter airlines, like in the Comoros, with the longer haul airlines, I think you can actually create a lot of economic benefits with tourism, with the Vanilla Islands case, or with just more connecting traffic with the Value Lines.
So that's actually an interesting point, and that example. So this example you brought up, which is flying from South Korea to Australia via Singapore, because I think there's like an exact parallel with the big alliance, right? Which is in Star Alliance, whereas in the Value Alliance, right, they're offering a connection between Jeju Air in South Korea and then flying to Australia via Scoot Airlines in Singapore. That is effectively a parallel of flying from South Korea on Asiana Airlines to Singapore, and then flying Singapore Airlines to Australia, with all of which are in Star Alliance. So I guess, do you think that those two are, in a sense, do you think that they're just serving different parts of the general public completely, whereas the big airlines are based primarily only for business travelers, whereas for example, now we're going to see more of these tourist based, leisure traveler based airline alliances.
Yeah, I would expect that at least in this case, it'd be difficult to convince myself that the Asiana and Singapore Airlines connection would be preferable. Of course, it's going to lead on comfort, is there a really significant drop in comfort when you fly to some low cost airlines, especially when some of them still offer relatively premium seats that are still going to be a lot cheaper, and from a cost standpoint, I think really the only people who would choose to fly the more expensive option are the business travelers, and especially in this region, I think, and even during COVID, there really aren't a lot of business travelers, and I think that's where the Value Alliance comes in handy, for these low cost carriers who need as much leisure demand as possible.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's certainly, again, interesting to keep in mind, especially as we go forward, since Value Alliance it was only formed in, Vanilla Alliance was only formed in 2015, and Value Alliance in 2016. So these are all incredibly new, whereas, the big airline alliances of SkyTeam, Oneworld, and Star Alliance, they were all from, I believe, the early 90s, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think that sounds right.
Um, yeah, so I mean, these smaller airline alliances, I think it'd be certainly interesting to see, what other new airline alliances there are and will pop up in the world, especially ones which may compete with the well-established big three.
Yeah, and I would expect there should be more. I'm surprised already that there's six, but of course, without the consolidation in the airline industry, I'm not really surprised there's a consolidation in the alliance world. But certainly, if Value Alliance can be successful, especially during COVID, which I would be interested in actually looking more into, I would expect potentially Southwest to consider aligning somewhere.
Yeah, Southwest, and an interesting alliance between the low cost carriers, maybe Southwest Frontier, Allegiant. That would definitely be interesting, and would certainly pose a great, if that came to fruition, it would certainly pose a sizable danger towards the established legacy carriers, especially in the United States.
Yeah, and especially I think if you can incorporate newer airlines like Avelo into that, who suffer from a lack of connections, that if you can get airlines like that already are pretty revolutionary and I think preferable, because Avelo has pretty good comfort. So if you can connect them into an alliance, I think that could really pose a threat to some of the legacy carriers.
Yeah, I mean, that's as we discussed last time. Avello. We definitely need to see the future track of Avello, but if an airline alliance came to fruition, that would certainly play that would certainly effectively throw the entire strategy for a loop, because now you have other airlines which are supporting, and collectively as a whole you are competing against the legacy carriers, as well as um, other players who may be uh, who may even form you know competitor alliances, which again, as always, it will be definitely interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, certainly. The airline industry has had surprises in the past, and I wouldn't be surprised to see some in the future. But anyways, I think this is a good spot to close out this episode. Of course, this was a very debate heavy episode in the beginning, and I think for any of you watching on your platform, I think this would be a great opportunity if you can to provide a comment on what you think the best alliance is, because of course it's a very a debatable topic and a very contentious topic. But hopefully this was an enjoyable episode to hear different perspectives on a variety of different factors that make airline alliances great, and hopefully your opinion has either been more informed or swayed, and look forward to our next episode as well. So thank you all for listening. Real quick, I just want to apologize for the lack of recordings we've posted to Anchor and to YouTube over the past week. Unfortunately, Jahao and I cannot record this upcoming week, meaning that once this episode is posted on Anchor and to YouTube, it will be about another week before we post again. So I just want to apologize for that, and just let you know to stick with us. We're not done yet. We're just taking breaks in recording due to lack of availability.